Today we're going to look at 1 John chapter 1 verses 5 to 10. So grab that, have a read, and come back to me. Why, as Christians, do we keep confessing our sins if we're already forgiven? The short answer is, well, it's a mark of someone who knows Jesus. If we know Jesus, we will confess our sins. Now, I know I've talked about this sort of thing in another passage previously, but the first requirement of becoming a Christian in the first place is to humbly admit that we've rebelled against God. So as Christians, then, we can't claim, as it says here, that we have no sin. If we do, we deceive ourselves, as it says in verse 8. We make God out to be a liar, because he says we are sinful in verse 10. So going back, what does it mean to walk in the light, as it says in verse 5? Here's what I think it doesn't mean first. It doesn't mean living a perfect life. A surface reading of this passage should tell you that. We can't do that. The context here quite clearly says what it means. It means confessing our sin to God and to others who are involved. Confessing being, first of all, admitting. Now, we don't confess randomly or publicly unless our sin is publicly and the public need to know. But, as it says elsewhere in the Bible, we confess to those we've sinned against, and we confess with the aim of restoring the relationship. That's made clear in verses 6 to 7, where we see that unconfessed sin means a broken fellowship with God. But it's also implied and then made clear in verse 7 that unconfessed sin also means a broken relationship with other people. Have you noticed there's a surprising turn there? Given verse 6, we might expect verse 7 to say, if we walk in the light, we have fellowship with him, with God. But no, it says we have fellowship with one another. In other words, confession to God restores our relationship with each other. So the image of light in this passage is not that of living in purity, but that of sin being exposed, which is really what confession is about. When we confess our sin, it's no longer hidden in the dark, in the shadows, but it's exposed to the light where it can be dealt with. So let me ask you, do you have something you need to confess to someone? A relationship that needs to be restored? If so, talk to that person as soon as you can, knowing that you are forgiven and that nothing you confess can change that. Your sin has no reason to hide in the dark any longer because you've already been purified by the blood of his Son. Now, I want to make it clear that just because God has already forgiven you for that, that doesn't mean there may not be, that doesn't mean that there won't be consequences for your sin. We still have to live with and own up to the consequences, fallout from any sin that we've committed. One last thing. There may be some sin in your life that no one knows about, that you're thinking that no one needs to know about because you think, well, it doesn't affect anyone but you. There's two things I want to say about that. First, expose the sin to the light, as it says here. Then it will lose its power. Find someone you trust, confess to them, and ask them to help you. The second thing I want to say about that is that you might think that sin doesn't affect others, but it does. It affects others in the way that you relate to other people, in the way you see other people, in the way you act, and the way you react to different things. So confess. Bring your sin into the light.